All right, thanks for joining us today. Today, Lawrence McCoy from New South Wales RFS is going to talk to us a bit about the challenge of trying to balance having an accurate prediction with the timeliness and the communication that decision makers may need, which is basically a core challenge for FBANs. You know, we can spend hours getting a really good prediction, but the decision makers quite often want something faster. Lawrence is going to give us some case studies, and then, depending on the time, we'll take some questions and have a bit of discussion afterwards. Over to you, Lawrence. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Mike. How's the volume there?
I can hear you well.
Okay, we'll kick off then. Okay, so for those that I haven't met before, my name's Lawrence McCoy. I'm a Senior Fire Behaviour Analyst with New South Wales RFS, and what prompted me to, discuss this concept with Mike was that we wanted to give a presentation that we noted that an observation that some often our newer FBANs are spending too much time trying to get their prediction right. And in doing so, they're seeing their window of opportunity for the prediction to be useful close. So for some of the more experienced FBANs, this might discuss concepts that may not be new, but rather than hanging up, perhaps view the concepts as something that might help with mentoring the newer FBANs, or there might be some interest in the case studies that I'll show as well. Interesting enough, I prepared this prediction independently, and then quickly glanced over the Risk Frontiers report that was prepared for Delwip, and some of the concepts discussed in there are consistent with this. So I've approached it from a practitioner's point of view, mostly from experience over the last few seasons. So in starting, I guess the intermediate course really provides us with a solid grounding for FBANs to start preparing predictions and analysing those predictions, but there's significant gap, maybe in time and maybe in training needed between someone attending the course and then actually preparing and analysing a prediction in an operational setting within an agency's corporate environment. So we know that preparing and analysing prediction is it's a difficult enough task in a classroom, let alone in an operational environment with all the pressure and noise of a fast tempo incident. So in New South Wales, we've been trying hard not to put the FBANs into difficult situations because it's understandable how people, uncertain with their new role, can focus on doing the job rather than doing what is needed for decision makers to get the job done. So as I said, I've approached this from a practitioner's perspective, and hopefully what I'm about to present is consistent with Kevin Tolhurst's vision for the role. So in this slide, often, as Mike said, the balance between accuracy and providing a useful product in time can be tricky. So, as I said, new FBANs can be uncertain. The balance between getting a useful product out and the accuracy is often skewed towards trying to be accurate. But as I said, I've seen those somewhat accurate predictions not timely enough to be useful. So the question for us is, can we prepare a prediction that can be useful in a time frame that the customer can use? And so more and more as the FBAN role becomes more routine embedded into our operations, we're seeing that whether a prediction becomes useful comes down to that interaction with the customer. Having an understanding of what the product is being generated for really helps us understand how much time we have to prepare the prediction. So for us, we're seeing a transition of the location of the FBANs. Initially, we started off primarily doing the role in at headquarters, and more we're trying to deploy F-bands into incident management teams, and where those F-bands are located can be really crucial as to how useful that prediction is for that incident management team or the operations. So, when we embed these F-bands in the IMTs, they can easily form the links to key personnel. And as I said, we found the difference. We found the location of the F-band being the difference between a useful prediction that could be used in context and comments that, the difference between the prediction being thrown into the operation officer's bin. So there's a point there on the stage of the incident. So often the accuracy required depends on the tempo or what stage the incident's at. So is the fire in the escalation phase where the prediction needs to be, we need to give the IMT a course prediction of what could happen, appreciation of the potential or something to guide their warnings? Or on the other hand, is the fire in a containment stage where timing is critical for the implementation of containment options? So obviously there's a need to ensure that the initial prediction helps the customer. And across the nation, there's various systems for preparing those initial rapid appreciation predictions. But there's still context required for these predictions. So in preparing a rapid appreciation prediction, is it going to be used for strategic or tactical decision making? So are we going to use those predictions to triage, or are they going to be used by the IMT to make decisions? And there might be both. So and for us in New South Wales, where we have a situation where we don't often release a simulated prediction, we might use those initial rapid appreciation predictions to determine what fires we do manual predictions on. So, and in some cases, it really does depend on the scale of the prediction. So I'll move on to the next slide. So in talking about scales of accuracy, the scale of the incident really is critical because the error bands expand depending on how big the fire is, obviously. So, some of the questions we might want to think about in scale is it likely that extreme fire behaviour is exhibited where we might measure accuracy in kilometres? Alternately, is it a fire where we're inserting remote firefighters and where 100 metres could make a difference for that prediction? So I've got a couple of examples here for that concept of scales of accuracy. So the first prediction here, I'm sorry if that's a bit hard to see, that's a prediction for the State Mine Fire. And so it's a bit hard to gauge the scale there, but that fire actually spread 35 k's in a 24-hour period. In that instance, that particular prediction, there was about a 16% error band, overestimate with that prediction. So when we're predicting a fire on a landscape scale, that error band doesn't seem very, very high. It's pretty good, actually. I think Miguel Cruz talks about a 30% error band being about as good as we can expect. But on a landscape scale, 16% represents a 6K error. So I guess, is this a problem? And that question really needs to be answered in context for the incident. So in this case, and in hindsight, what was more important for this fire was the trajectory of that fire. So early predictions, so I've moved on to this next slide that shows the early predictions that used a northwesterly wind or weather stream. These predictions predicted that the suburbs east of Lithgow would be in the direct path of this fire. So the prediction was later revised based on the observed wind direction which was more to the west. But I think in that context, the 6 kilometre error wasn't really the issue. The issue was the trajectory of the plume and the fire behaviour. So moving on to the next concept, I think if I go back to this slide, I just introduced an uncertainty concept into this prediction here, where I talk about the plume-driven direction. So there was possibility. We thought that perhaps there was a southerly change due on this fire. Perhaps the fire would continue heading from west to east until such times that the southerly change gathered enough strength to influence the direction of the fire. But so uncertainty is an interesting concept to introduce, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So I'm sorry I've jumped around a bit here, but I'm going back to the scales of accuracy. And here we've got a prediction undertaken where detailed analysis was required to answer specific questions the IMT had regarding the backburns. And we had our F-band embedded within this IMT, and they had some specific operational questions. And in this case, timeframes facilitated the detailed analysis that were required, and the prediction facilitated critical tactical decisions. So there was the F-band in the IMT was able to communicate with the customers easily and was able to provide a prediction in context with respect to timing and relevance of that prediction. So I'll jump back to that communicating uncertainty concept. And I guess organisationally, or more specifically, we have role-based cultures, and we have these operations officers that I can hear them saying now, I don't want to hear another disclaimer, Lawrence, just tell me what's going to happen. And so we have this culture within certain roles that have specific communication requirements or tempo of what they're doing. And so in a fast-paced incident, often decision makers don't have time for the uncertainty considerations. So, but as an analyst, in terms of accuracy, we need to concisely convey what we think could happen and what is within the realms of potentially a best or a worst case scenario. So one concept that often I think people think about and we don't talk about very often is that finding that balance between unnecessarily alarming decision makers and the subsequent loss of credibility if a prediction doesn't eventuate can be a fine line. Often there are triggers that could result in divergent predictions. If the fire crosses a road, for example, and hits a patch of heavy fuels or heavy grass fuels, could run a long way. Alternately, the fire could stop on that road. And so for F-bands preparing and analysing predictions remotely, not in that IMT setting or closer to the incident, likelihood is a very difficult concept. And I think we've been exploring the use of ensemble predictions, but I guess I'd raise the question, are we at a point where we can confidently communicate the likelihood? And I guess in finally summing up that, back to that concept, ever-present concern of being, our prediction being accurate or our prediction being wildly inaccurate if the prediction does or does not eventuate, and that concern of losing credibility. So here's a context where I was able to communicate some uncertainty, and the prediction on the screen, its resolution is not awesome, but this was a fire in Tasmania where I was embedded within the IMT, and I produced a pretty rough prediction. It was quite messy, and I think if that prediction was produced remotely and provided to the IMT, that would be difficult to interpret, and its operational usefulness might not have been as effective as what I was able to convey, the jumbled message being in an IMT, talking to the key personnel and understanding the questions they had. So for this particular prediction, timing of impact to the road to the west of the fire was critical. And not really where the fire was going to impact along the road. It was one way in and out to a couple of villages there, and if the fire impacted anywhere on the road, they really just wanted to know when that might happen. And being in the IMT, we're able to interpret those requirements for them, and it turned out that the prediction was quite reasonable, and the operation progressed pretty smoothly as a result. And so the IMT were able to consider that prediction in context and provide the timely warning and evacuation options for those villages. So I'll move on to the Wombalong fire, and so I'm going to introduce this concept of, is communicating more important than the prediction? And I sort of discussed it a little bit in that Tasmania example, but in an ideal world, I guess our predictions would be 100% accurate, and we'd be able to provide timely and accurate advice to decision makers and ultimately to the community all the time. On the first afternoon of this Wombalong fire, the first prediction, well, overnight it was reasonable, but in context of the entire incident, it was proved to be, have some inaccuracies. And however, what actually did occur was there's some important analysis that provided the IMT to take action. And so in terms of the prediction may not have been the key factor for the actions that the IMT took. So I've got a copy of the prediction report here, and what we provided the IMT was that we're able to communicate to the IMT the potential for the day. It highlighted windows for opportunity for the IMT to consider and what strategies and tactics might have been useful. And it provided a basis for the IMT to help make a decision in context. Communication was really important in this case. I think, history and the formal inquiries can provide judgment as to whether the decisions that were made by the IMT were the correct ones, but the fire behaviour analysis on that initial night resulted in a decision and an action from that IMT. And I'd argue that communication was really important in that case. So here's the next day for the Wombalong fire, and as you can see in this example, the fire had broken out from those initial containment efforts the night before, and the fire was beginning to escalate quite rapidly, as you can see from the line scan here. The fire was escalating. This was the tempo of the incident had changed. There's a need for temporal and spatial accuracy in a short time frame with this escalating, fast-moving fire. And so the change from the previous prediction the night before was that the weather forecast, and in particular the wind speed and direction, were modified. We knew the fire could break out somewhere, but when and where were the key questions. But we now had the information for this with this line scan on day 2. So in this case, accuracy and timeliness was critical. And again, with this prediction, we learned some very important lessons, particularly around pyroconvection and predictions during extreme weather events. So we can talk about that at another time. So in context, we have two different scenarios for the timeliness requirements of the predictions. So I think once we've prepared our predictions, I think it's pretty common now that we're using some of these verification tools. And just as a comment aside, my recent experience that using the bomb radar and the Himalaya imagery to track the fire spread is that really we need, as users, to be able to time to calibrate. In the early days, we're finding that detection of a fire by Himalaya in the radar might have biased the F-band towards a perception of fire behaviour being actually more extreme than what was occurring. But anyway, they're very important tools to consider in the mix, and I think with time our understanding of these products has improved. So just in terms of just an example here of using the tools for verification and to help us improve predictions going forward. So in this fire in the northwest of New South Wales in 2015, the fire was detected by Himalaya, and the IMT thought the fire was in the location, and so we ran a couple of models. And so initially a deterministic model was run from what the IMT thought was the point of origin, and we were looking at Himalaya, and we ran an ensemble prediction from a pixel that I've highlighted in the blue box. And so that was quite a large area. It's a couple of kilometres by a couple of kilometres, but as you can see, the third component to that was what the actual fire actually did. And so we've got two predictions that were rapidly prepared for the IMT to answer their question, and they were concerned about a town that was located up here, and they were making some tactical decisions about what aircraft they might use on this fire, and they were wondering whether the fire might impact that town and when and where, etc. So I think the interesting aspect to this example was that despite the location uncertainty and those rapidly prepared predictions provided ballpark accuracy. They answered the question for the IMT. They still went ahead and used very large aircraft, which may have improved the accuracy of the predictions, but it was an example of where we had to get a prediction out quickly, and we used the simulators to do so. So, I've gone for half an hour here, but just in summary, I think predictions are very difficult to prepare, and they can often take a while to produce, especially when we're trying to get ahead around complex fires. But I think what's critical is we need to have a think or a discussion with the customer or the person making a request about what is needed. Does the prediction need to be timely, accurate, provide options or analysis? Sometimes it might be all of the above. I think in New South Wales, the F-band into IMT transition has again this season been successful because it's facilitated the conversations with people that can use the information, and conversely, we've had people in place that can provide local intel and improve the predictions. I think, from experience, it's easier as an F-band to prepare a prediction and tick the box, say, yes, I've done the prediction. But as we mature as a role and a function, our technology improves, interpretation and communication is more and more likely to be the key to the usefulness of our role, product and function. And I think have an image there of one of my T-shirts, and it can be difficult to have those conversations, and to have the conversation. But I think as we mature, we need to push ourselves to have those conversations. And I guess we've always come back to Kevin Tolhurst's bottom line that there's always going to be limitations in what we know and what we can predict, but we will be able to know enough to do better than doing nothing. And as we have experience, communities will forgive us for not knowing what we don't know, but not for using what we do know. So that's all I had to formally present now. Hopefully that might stimulate a little bit of discussion. Back over to you, Mike.
Oh, thanks, Lawrence. That was really good. Does anyone have any questions for Lawrence? Or
the moderator has placed the conference into presentation mode. All participants are now muted. The moderator has placed the conference into conversation mode. All participants are now unmuted.
So does anyone have any questions or would like to make a comment? Has anyone experienced similar things to what Lawrence has talked about? Don't be shy.
G'day, Mike. It's Jackson here from DFES. Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, reiterate how important that communication is and how effectively Lawrence got that across in his presentation.
Thanks, Jackson. Oh, well, that's fine. You've done a great job in that case.
Not too controversial then, Mike.
Too controversial or too obvious?
Yeah, Mike, it's Greg Ainov. Thanks, Lawrence. I thought that was a great presentation as well. You talked about you're looking at ensemble modelling and how to show that uncertainty. And I know there's some people in Queensland and other places that are dabbling in this spot as well. Do you think there's going to be a way that can be well displayed, or do you think it's always going to be complex how you do that sort of probabilistic work and how you display it?
I had a conversation with a meteorologist a while back who really foresaw the role of a meteorologist shifting from essentially preparing the forecast to actually communicating the forecast. And I think ensemble modelling and forecasting might be a similar concept, Greg. I think in the future when our technologies improve to a point where we're able to predict fire behaviour and fires rapidly and accurately using these ensemble predictions, the role shifts more from preparing the prediction to communicating the prediction and having to think about the implications of what that prediction means. I think ensemble forecasts can be difficult to interpret and to understand, and having someone, particularly within an IMT, that can interpret those products will be more and more required in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Lawrence. It's interesting, and I know Mike Wouters you're sponsoring or trying to get some research sponsored by Tim Neal on how you communicate uncertainty. But I mean, an example I hear often when I'm travelling in public transport and around about is people say, "Oh, the Bureau forecasted we're going to get 2.3 mils of rain at 11:30, and it hasn't rained. So why did I bring a raincoat?" So. It's a very frustrating area to try and communicate effectively and get people to understand what you're communicating.
Well, people's perceptions of probability often vary widely as well. I mean, is a 60% chance of rain definitely going to rain, or is it a little bit more likely that it's going to rain than not?
Yeah, so I think this whole area is going to really be a challenge for FBANs in how to communicate into IMTs and even more broadly out to the community. Thanks, Lawrence.
Thanks, Greg. Any other comments or questions? Okay, that's food for thought. Thanks, Lawrence. That's really good. The next webinar will likely be on the Tuesday, the 12th of June. I'll send some material out in the next week or two, and this webinar should be available online for those who aren't listening to me, probably in about 2 to 3 weeks. So thanks for your participation, and we'll hope to see you next time. Thanks.